Hi, my name is Lydia and welcome to my channel. Thank you for clicking on this video. If you are interested in true crime like I am, I invite you to subscribe and come back for more true crime stories. Let's begin. In this video, I'll be talking about the crimes of baby killer Paula Sims. To put it bluntly, yes, this is a difficult case to talk about and to listen to. There are parts of the story that are simply ghastly, and they are even more difficult to talk about because, as of October 29th, 2021, Paula Sims is a free woman. Yes, Paula was granted parole after serving 32 years in prison for the murder of her two infant daughters. A fact which will become even more maddening by the time our story ends. My sources for this true crime are linked below in the description box. Of course, the content warning here is that this story involves the murder of two infants. In my retelling of this crime, I mean no disrespect to the persons mentioned, and it is my intent to relay this information for educational purposes and to give a voice to the voiceless. Lorelei Marie Sims was a beautiful red-haired baby girl born on June 5th, 1986. She was a healthy baby girl, and she had 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes. She had clear and bright, inquisitive eyes and a sweet disposition. The other mother in the hospital room that was shared with Paula, the mom, and Lorelei, she remarked on how good of a baby Lorelei was. She was so beautiful that the nurses in the hospital oohed and ahed, and they remarked that they just wanted to take her home for themselves. If only they had. Unfortunately for Lorelei, she was born to Paula and Robert Sims, and she would only live to be 12 days old. Paula Sims started life as Paula Marie Blue, daughter to parents Orville and Nylene Blue. Orville was a good man, a good worker in the pipeline industry, and a good provider for his family. Nylene was friendly and outgoing and took care of the family at home. The Blue family lived a comfortable life in rural Missouri, though they would come to endure several family tragedies. Their first son, Dennis, suffered through a serious case of the measles at age 3, and then from there he developed a serious seizure disorder. Even though he was a pleasant and intelligent boy, Dennis would need constant care all of his life. And as the years went by, Orville and Nylene certainly were willing to provide that care. The Blues' second child was another son, Randy. Handsome and popular in school, Randy would end up being good friends with his little sister Paula. And they would be born 3 years apart. And that would complete the family of 5 for Orville and Nylene. Paula Marie Blue was born on May 21st, 1959, and she seemingly had a normal and happy childhood. Paula was a good student. She was known to be a little bit shy, but also a bit of a tomboy, and she was a good athlete as well. Paula excelled at both softball and basketball. Paula was tough. She was protective of her older brother, Dennis. She didn't really like babysitting, though, and she would make extra money mowing lawns instead. As Paula grew into her teens, she began to experiment with some typical teenage things, especially for the 1970s. She dabbled in recreational drugs, and she drank alcohol, and she dated older boys. Paula had one particular boyfriend that her older brother Randy did not like. And although Randy was dabbling in the same teenage pastimes as his little sister Paula, he was still protective of his sister. Unfortunately, all the fast living would catch up with both Randy and Paula on April 10th, 1976. That night, Randy borrowed a friend's car and he took Paula out for a drive. Randy had been drinking. He was speeding as he took a turn in the road too quickly, and losing control of his car, he crashed head-on to another car, ultimately ricocheting off and crashing head-on into a tree. It was a catastrophic crash. Randy died at the scene. He was only 19 years old. Paula suffered injuries to her face and she was hospitalized, but ultimately she recovered. She was 16 years old. Paula was never the same after the car accident that killed her brother Randy. Randy and Paula had been 2 peas in the pod, and now everything was different for her. She became withdrawn and angry. And of course, the entire Blue family would never be the same. 1 month after Randy's funeral, the family packed up and moved from Missouri to Illinois. It would be a fresh start for the family. In Illinois, Paula finished high school in a new school. For the most part, she kept to herself and made only a few friends. She continued to play softball, but she had quit basketball. After graduation, Paula and one of her friends started a computer operator program at the local community college. But Paula never finished that program. Instead, Paula started working at a local grocery store in the town of Godfrey in 1978. Later, her coworkers at the grocery store would describe Paula as distant and a bit of a loner, and that she was not friendly with customers or the other employees. They would say Paula was quiet, but would often have flashes of a bad temper. Her time at the grocery store would not end well, as she was eventually fired after being caught ringing up groceries for her friends for less than the amount that she was supposed to. In 1979, fate would bring together Paula Blue and Rob Sims as they met through mutual friends at a party. And as events would unfold after the meeting of Paula and Rob, it would turn out to be a doomed fate after all. Robert Sims was born April 20th, 1952. He would be 8 years older than Paula. Robert, or Rob as he was called, was a loner as a kid. And like Paula, Rob came from a supportive and typical middle-class family. Rob's father was an elementary music teacher in the city of Alton, Illinois, and his mother was a homemaker. The family included 3 sons and 1 daughter. Rob's 2 older brothers had gone off to college. And likely due to the musical influence of Rob's father, Rob played tuba in the high school marching band, and he also sang in the chorus. Instead of being involved in sports or other team activities, Rob liked to work with tools and build models. By the time Rob met Paula, Rob had experienced a lot in life. He had worked as a loan officer after high school, and following that job, in October 1972, he had joined the Navy, spending most of his 3-year tour in the state of Maine. Later, at several different points of time, Rob would remark that he had been in Vietnam, but that was not the case. Instead, while Rob was stationed in Maine, he had met a local woman, who he married. And after his tour was over, the couple moved back to Rob's hometown of Alton. But the marriage was not to last. And after a quick divorce, his ex-wife returned to Maine. In 1979, Rob Sims was working as a laborer at a paper manufacturing plant in Alton. He worked a swing shift, which meant he slept and he worked odd hours. But Rob was just odd overall, according to coworkers and acquaintances. Later, some people would describe Rob Sims as one of the strangest people they had ever met. Rob was thin with brown hair and a brown beard and dark eyes. He was soft-spoken and yet quick to anger. He was reported harassing women who also worked at the paper manufacturing plant. And some of his coworkers would say that they thought Rob had a problem with women in authority. Rob liked to be in charge. Robert and Paula Sims were married on May 2nd, 1981. Paula was 21 years old and Rob was 29. The couple first rented a small cottage in the town of Cottage Hills, and then they bought their first home on a rural piece of property outside of the town of Brighton. It was in Jersey County, Illinois. In the 4th year of their marriage, Paula became pregnant, and it was 1985. She was 26 years old. The early evening hours of Tuesday, June 17th, 1986, passed uneventfully for Don and Minnie Gray, both in their 50s and neighbors to the young couple next door, Paula and Rob Sims, and their newborn daughter, Lorelei. Minnie and Paula had become friendly in the 2 years they had been neighbors, and Minnie had enjoyed chatting with Paula as she had prepared for the arrival of her baby. She had enjoyed helping Paula set up her nursery, which had mostly been decorated with blue decorations and blue clothes, as if Paula thought she'd be bringing home a boy. Their sonogram had not been clear on the sex of the baby. Minnie and Don would never have imagined in their wildest dreams the events which would take place at the quiet house next door. Minnie and Don had just finished watching the weather portion of the evening news, the 10 o'clock news, and they were preparing for bed. All of a sudden, there was a loud knocking on their front door and a woman screaming, "Help me! They stole my baby! They stole my baby! It was Paula Sims. Don Gray immediately offered to call the police. Frantic, Paula said she needed to go back to her house to call Rob at work. Minnie followed her into the darkness and back to the Simses' house. It was now 10:30 p.m. Paula called Rob at work while Minnie looked around the house. Everything seemed as it usually had. Everything was in order. Everything was neat and tidy, as it always was. Even the blanket in Lorelei's empty bassinet was carefully folded back. Minnie couldn't believe what was happening. Lorelei Sims was only 12 days old, and now she was gone. The police arrived on the scene, and Paula quickly told the story of what had happened. Rob arrived home shortly afterward, and this is what Paula said. Paula reported that she had been watching the news downstairs in the basement when a man in a ski mask with a gun came in. He was a white man in dark clothes, Paula said. He had also been wearing gloves. He had told Paula to lay on the floor for 10 minutes or he would kill her. Paula obeyed and laid on the floor. She listened as the man moved around the room for a minute or two, and then, all of a sudden, she realized that he had left. She jumped up and looked in the bassinet, but Lorelei was no longer there. So Paula had run outside, and then she saw a shadowy figure running down the driveway, and she had heard footsteps in the gravel. Paula stated that she had chased the kidnapper out to the road, but that she couldn't see or hear anything. It was too dark. And then he was just gone. Jersey County Sheriff Frank Yoakum, friendly and well-liked in the community, had a lot of experience in his many years working as sheriff. But walking onto the scene of the disappearance and purported kidnapping of Lorelei Sims was one of the strangest experiences of his career. From the start of the investigation, nothing fit according to the story that Paula told. The distraught mother was not making sense, and Sheriff Yoakum was making a mental list of things that weren't adding up. Number 1, the rip in the screen door which the kidnapper had cut to gain entry to the house was very small and precise. It was almost as if, he thought, the person didn't want to do much damage at all to the door and wanted to do as little damage as possible. Number 2, the Simses' big collie dog, Shadow, was known to bark when anyone came to the door. Why hadn't the dog barked and alerted Paula when a person had entered the house? Number 3, as the police officers and detectives went in and out of the house, the screen door made a screeching sound every time it would open and close. Why hadn't Paula heard that noise? Number 4, there was a bright security light which illuminated the long 120-yard driveway, the gravel driveway, in front of the Simses' house. Why hadn't Paula been able to see the kidnapper better as he ran away? There would have been plenty of light. Number 5, there was an awkward high step in the middle of the stairs to the front porch, and the police officers just kept tripping over it. How had the kidnapper not tripped on that same step, as he had been fleeing with Lorelei? Number 6, no neighbors reported hearing or seeing anything unusual that night. Number 7, neither Paula nor Rob showed any emotions of gut-wrenching fear or grief during their questioning by police, and though she seemed hysterical, Paula Sims had not one tear roll down her cheeks. The investigation into the disappearance of Lorelei Sims was headed by 3 people: Sheriff Frank Yoakum, Police Captain Phil Kokis, and Illinois State DCI agent Detective Jimmy Bevins. All 3 agreed. From the start, they were suspicious of Robert and Paula Sims, and they all thought, sadly, that the beautiful baby Lorelei was likely already deceased and her parents were somehow involved. Of course, the first duty of the investigation was to run down any possible leads in case this was a true kidnapping case. But with the info that Paula had given, there was no trail to follow, no car description, and no good description of the kidnapper himself. The only thing left was to focus on the Simses' property and their house, and so that's where the investigation remained. In the days that followed, a large search effort was made to search the Simses' property and the surrounding area. Divers came to search the 2-acre pond. As the sonar-equipped boat slowly moved across the water, the divers had to feel their way along the bottom, moving through the murky water and the muck. An airplane searched from above, using an infrared camera to pick up on any signs of body heat in the nearby woods or fields. Police dogs were used to search the pond area and the front of the house and down the road. Nothing was picked up. Paula and Rob's families had arrived at their home to offer their support. Rob's sister, Linda Condrey, was particularly upset that the investigation seemed to be focused on her brother and Paula. Strangely, though, neither parent and no family member offered to help in the search themselves. With nothing coming from the search at the house and the property, Sheriff Yoakum and the other investigators went to the hospital where Lorelei had been born only days before. Hospital staff had nothing remarkable to report from Paula's stay there. It had been a normal delivery, and all had seemed well. But an interview with Paula's hospital roommate had turned up something interesting. She had recalled Paula crying when she was on the phone with Rob, apologizing for having a little girl. When she asked Paula if she was okay, Paula had just remarked that her husband was upset since they had both wanted a boy. The police asked Paula and Rob to both take lie detector tests, which they agreed to. Both parents failed the test, but they never strayed from their story. The police effort was stalled, with no more information coming in. On Tuesday, June 24th, Lorelei had been missing for a week. The investigators decided to make another go at both Paula and Rob and attempt another search on the property. As Paula and Rob were being interviewed again at the police station, police dogs were brought to search the property again. This time, cadaver dogs, dogs which are trained to search for the deceased, were instructed to search the steep wooded terrain behind the Simses' house, the exact opposite direction in which Paula had said the kidnapper had fled. And on that wooded hillside, about 150 feet away from the home of Paula and Rob Sims, at the base of a small tree, the cadaver dog alerted. And when Sheriff Yoakum looked among the tangled weeds, he discovered the skeletal remains of an infant. There were no clothes. There was no burial. The partial remains indicated that a small animal had likely disturbed the body in the week that it had been resting in the woods. They had found Lorelei. Immediately, Paula and Rob Sims retained a lawyer and stopped communicating with the police. And after the body of Lorelei was discovered, they also left their house and began staying at Paula's parents' home. They quietly put up their home for sale, only returning to move out their belongings after it had sold. The extensive autopsy of the small body would take over a year, but the identification was confirmed. This was Lorelei Marie Sims, age 12 days old. Sheriff Yoakum and the other investigators were frustrated. Any evidence that they had on either Paula or Rob was only circumstantial, and neither parent was talking to the police. The answer as to what had happened to Lorelei seemed out of reach. On Tuesday, September 8th, 1987, over a year after Lorelei's death, the county coroner closed the book on the case. The results of the autopsy were inconclusive. Because of the state of the body when it was found, the cause and the mode of the death of Lorelei Sims remained undetermined. The media attention from Lorelei's death meant that Rob and Paula had received plenty of airtime on local and national television. Paula no longer showed the crying, grief-stricken face of a mother missing her baby. Her expression had now gone icy and stone-faced. It would be a look that she would show to the media and the world for years to come. Rob Sims made a final statement to the media. He stated that he and Paula had accepted that the remains found were indeed their daughter Lorelei, but that it still didn't seem real. They couldn't understand why people had a hard time believing that they were telling the truth about the kidnapping, and when asked if they would have more children, Rob could only answer in a whisper, "I don't know." Rob wouldn't have to wonder long. 20 months after the birth of Lorelei, Paula was back in the hospital bringing a second child into the world. On February 1st, 1988, Randall Troy Sims was born. This time, the sonogram had been clear. The happy parents expected a boy. Named after Paula's deceased brother, Randy was a cute baby boy with red hair and a sweet disposition. He was doted on by his parents and grandparents, and he enjoyed a life that his older sister had not known. The little boy was kept out of the public for the most part. The Sims family had moved to the city of Alton, Illinois, in Madison County, buying a simple 2-story home on a suburban street, right next to a middle school. The Sims were wary of prying eyes in their new home, installing a high fence, dark curtains over the windows, and a windowless steel back door. Also concerned about security, they installed a bright security light, which illuminated their small yard very well. Of course, the prying eyes which the Sims were concerned about included the police investigators who had not forgotten Lorelei. Those investigators were aware of where the Sims now lived and had heard about the birth of the baby boy. However, they would never have anticipated what happened next. On Saturday 29th, 1989, at 11:27 p.m., a call was placed into the Alton Police Department. The caller was reporting the abduction of a baby by a masked gunman. The caller was Paula Sims. When the rookie cop arrived at the house, he was met on the sidewalk by a frantic Rob Sims. Rob was shouting, "We've got to set up roadblocks. They have taken my daughter. They took my other daughter. They took her from my wife. They knocked her out and took our baby." If the rookie cop had recognized the name of Paula Sims, he would have been shocked. Paula and Rob Sims had had another daughter? And that daughter was now kidnapped as well? Could lightning really strike twice? Heather Lee Sims was born on March 18, 1989, only 15 months after her brother Randy was born. She was a beautiful blonde-haired, healthy baby girl and a joy to her grandparents. Her birth filled a little bit of the hole left by the death of her older sister, Lorelei. Heather Lee Sims would live to be only 5 weeks old. What had happened to Heather Lee? Paula and Rob Sims had another story to tell. Back to Saturday, April 29th, 1989. A hysterical Paula reported that she had been taking out a bag of dirty diapers around 10:30 p.m. when she saw a man standing in the driveway. He was wearing dark clothes and a ski mask, and he was pointing a gun at her. She didn't notice his race. The man told her to get back in the house. Paula had turned to go back into the house through the kitchen when the man had struck her on the back of the head. She said that it had felt like a karate chop with his bare hand. She said she didn't remember anything else until Rob had awakened her when he returned from work at 11:12 p.m. Robert had found his wife unconscious, lying face down on the kitchen floor. For Rob's part, he reported to the police that he had awoken Paula and then had run right into the dining room to check on baby Heather. The dining room had been converted into a temporary nursery for Paula and Heather. He discovered that Heather was missing, and then he had run upstairs to check on 15-month-old Randy, who was sound asleep in his bedroom. To the police officers on the scene, the couple were not acting in the way that they would expect them to. Paula seemed to be thinking too long when answering a question, trying to be careful in her responses. And at one point she remarked, "My son's all right, and that's all that matters." Another suspicious fact was that Paula did not seem affected by being knocked unconscious. There was no mark on her head and no mark on her body from supposedly falling onto the floor. Yet another suspicious thing was that Rob immediately called his sister Linda to both tell her about the kidnapping and to call their lawyer. And, in a turn of events which would become very significant later, Rob also called Paula's parents. The Blues had left their home early that morning to visit family in Missouri, and when they received Rob's call, they told him they would cut their visit short and they would return home the next day, on Sunday. Police dogs were brought to the house, but again, there was no trail to follow and no other information to investigate. Another mystery man had simply showed up and disappeared with their baby daughter, without a single trace. The investigation into the disappearance of Heather Lee Sims, the second Sims' baby daughter to disappear, would again focus on the parents. And this time for the detectives, it wasn't their first rodeo with Paula and Rob Sims. This time, nothing would be missed. This time, they knew they'd only have one shot before the couple's lawyer would shut down communication. Investigators noted that just like in the disappearance of Lorelei, not a thing was out of place in the Sims' home. The blanket in Heather's bassinet was perfectly folded back, eerily similar to Lorelei's bassinet. Even the rug onto which Paula had supposedly fallen after being knocked unconscious was perfectly straight. As the police looked around the house further, they discovered something else strange. The house had a perfectly decorated little boy's room for Randy, but no nursery or bedroom set up for a little girl. Their third bedroom sat unused. In fact, there was hardly any evidence that a baby girl lived there at all. The security light outside was so bright that it illuminated the entire area behind the house. To the detectives, Paula should have definitely seen more details about the kidnapper. Even though Paula seemed to have recovered miraculously from being hit over the head and knocked unconscious, the detectives wanted Paula to be examined by medical professionals. They wanted medical proof and documents that no injury had actually occurred. They also wanted to separate Paula and Rob so that they could be interviewed separately. Reluctantly, Paula agreed to go to the hospital, and reluctantly, Rob agreed to be interviewed again. He complained that Sheriff Yoakum had never believed them during that case. The police were direct with Rob. They asked him frankly if he trusted his wife's story about the kidnapping of Heather, as well as her story of the kidnapping of Lorelei. They pointed out everything which didn't make sense, and Robert did admit to the police that he trusted his wife, yes, but he did consider that his wife may have been lying. Still, ultimately, all he would do was recount the same story. Back at the hospital, staff noted that Paula had no indication of an injury at all, or of being unconscious. She just didn't need an in-depth scan or an exam. But the police pressed their point. They wanted Paula examined thoroughly. It would be important if the case would ever move to trial. Early in the morning of Wednesday, May 3, 1989, a fisherman stopped at a rest stop and public access area off a well-traveled highway in Missouri. It was in nearby St. Charles County. He became curious about a black trash bag at the bottom of a trash barrel outside of the rest stop's bathroom. His decision to open that black trash bag changed everything in the case of Heather Lee Sims. Sadly, inside that bag, he found the body of a naked female infant. The infant would be identified as Heather Sims, and the autopsy findings were grim. But unlike in the case of Lorelei, there was an official cause of death. The coroner had determined that the baby had been smothered due to cuts on the inside of her lips. But that wasn't all. The coroner had another alarming finding. After her death, Heather Lee Sims, a beautiful 5-week-old infant baby girl, had either been refrigerated or frozen prior to being dumped in the trash barrel. When Paula and Rob came to the police station to learn about the identification of Heather, the police knew they had only one chance to break either parent. Would it be Paula or Rob? It wouldn't be Paula. She sat for her interview for just a few minutes before she just simply stood up and walked out of the police station. She was a tough egg to crack. Rob, however, had something to say. He admitted to the investigators that he had come to suspect Paula, that she may have harmed the baby girls, and he wondered if his son Randy was now in danger. He inquired if Randy could be temporarily sent to live with relatives. Rob also offered to sign a statement saying that the baby's deaths might have been accidental and that maybe Paula could have caused them. Rob continued to deny any personal involvement, but he did offer to go home and talk to Paula. He thought if Paula had anything to confess, she would confess it to him. And he promised that he would bring in Paula by noon on the next day. The following day came and went. Neither Paula or Rob came back to the police station. However, the police did decide to move Randy out of the house, and little Randy was placed into the custody of the state. And the investigation continued. Police took black plastic trash bags from the Simses' home, hoping that they might be a match to the trash bag in which Heather had been found. The bags went to the lab so that the testing could begin. Detectives suspected that a freezer in Paula's parents' home might have been used to store little baby Heather, since they had not been home on the day of her disappearance, and because Paula had open access to their home. It would be an important theory which would come up later in trial. A break in the case came when investigators interviewed Paula's hospital roommate after Heather was born. She recounted the story that Paula had told her about the kidnapping of her first daughter, Lorelei. In the story she told, Paula had been hit in the head and knocked unconscious. However, that wouldn't happen for another 5 weeks and with a different daughter. It would happen with the disappearance of Heather, not Lorelei. Had Paula been planning the next fake kidnapping from the start? Heather Lee Sims was laid to rest as the investigation was heading into the pre-trial phase. Robert, Paula, and a few relatives and friends attended the service. Paula wore a dress and Rob wore a three-piece suit. Paula appeared to be crying at the graveside, and when the mourners left, the television crews videotaped the little white casket being lowered into the ground. Prosecutor Don Weber was tapped to take on the Paula Sims case in court. His first job was to decide in which direction to take this case. Time was ticking on the statute of limitations in the death of Lorelei Sims. If Paula was to be charged on any count other than murder, 3 years was the time limit to do so. Because of that, the state decided to charge Paula Sims with, quote, concealment of a homicide for furnishing false information to the police, while having knowledge that the victim had died by homicidal means, end quote. It was a strategic move to catch the defense lawyers off guard because the victim named in this case was Lorelei. Paula was brought in on these charges, but her father immediately posted her bail. Meanwhile, in the investigation of Heather's death, evidence was trickling in. It was determined that the black trash bags from the Simses' home were an exact match to the black trash bag in which Heather had been concealed. Experts brought to the stand later in the trial would say that the bag used to dispose of Heather was made in the factory within 10 seconds of the other bags in the roll that were found in the Simses' house. Paula was brought in on a second charge. This time, the charge was obstructing justice and concealing a homicidal death. The victim named in this charge was Heather Sims. Again, Paula's father immediately posted bail. Finally, the evidence gathered warranted a murder charge. The grand jury returned with an indictment charging Paula with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The charge was also worded in a way that would leave the door open for Rob to be charged, if necessary, as well. This time, there was no bond. Paula would remain in jail awaiting trial. Prosecutor Don Weber knew he had to nail down the timeline of what happened to Heather Lee Sims ASAP. How and when had her little body been frozen? How was her body missed at the Sims' home? And how did it end up at the rest stop in that awful trash barrel? The prosecutors caught a lucky break from an unusual source. Rob's own sister, Linda, was a staunch supporter of the couple, but a statement she made led to a very important clue. On the pretrial stand, Linda stated that on Sunday morning, the day after Heather's kidnapping, Rob had suggested that Paula go to her parents' house alone to get away from all the police activity. Linda stated that Paula took Randy, put him in the station wagon, packed a few things, and left for her parents' house. She further reported that Paula then arrived at Linda's house later in the afternoon, hours later. Don Weber was adding this fact to his timeline. It was finally time for the trial of Paula Sims to begin. Medical experts' testimony was crucial to the prosecutor's case against Paula Sims. Dr. Mary Case, the doctor who had performed the autopsy on Heather, confirmed the cause of death as suffocation, as well as proving that her body had been frozen afterward for a period of a few days. Paula Sims requested to not be in the courtroom during this portion of the trial. Additional medical testimony revealed that Paula could not have been hit and rendered unconscious for 45 minutes like she had claimed to be. No significant injury was noted on any of the exams from her time in the hospital. Additionally, if she had truly been knocked unconscious, she would not have been able to, as she stated she had, feel the blow to the back of her head. Her brain would not have been able to remember that. The prosecutor Don Weber's timeline for the murder of Heather Lee Sims and subsequent concealment of the body was a linchpin in the state's case. Here's what they thought happened. Heather was smothered by Paula on Saturday night while Rob was at work. Knowing that her parents were out of town, Paula had then driven to her parents' empty house and placed Heather's body in their freezer. She had returned home and feigned being unconscious until Rob arrived home from work at 11:15 p.m. With no body in her house, Paula was safe from suspicion. But time was ticking for Paula. Upon hearing of Heather's abduction, her parents had decided to come home the next day, starting the drive home from Missouri on Sunday morning. That had surprised Paula, and on Sunday, suspiciously, investigators had overheard Rob telling Paula to go to her parents' house, saying, Go to your parents' house. You can't be of any use here. What did that mean? And later, Rob's sister Linda would reluctantly confirm that this had happened. So, that's what Paula did, going to her parents' house on Sunday morning. The prosecution alleged that she had retrieved Heather's body from their freezer and brought it home, and put it in her own freezer. This made sense because the Simses' refrigerator and freezer had already been searched the night before on Saturday, and police wouldn't be looking there again. So, in the mind of Paula Sims, it was a safe place to store the body of her infant daughter. Of course, as the investigation began to heat up in the days that followed, Paula became nervous that her home would be searched again. And so it was on Wednesday, 4 days after Heather's death, that she decided to take her body from the freezer in her home and dump it. Prosecutor Don Weber showed how easy it would have been for Paula to dump Heather's body in the trash barrel at the rest stop area. The location was only 5 minutes away, 2.7 miles from the Simses' home. Additionally, her body was likely dropped in that particular trash barrel because it could be reached by a person simply driving up to it, reaching out of their car window, and dropping the bag inside. The person would not have even needed to get out of the car. It was a matter of convenience, not concealment. Don Weber concluded this timeline theory with a stunning thought. If this was true, which the prosecution believed that it was, it would have meant that Heather's death had always been premeditated. It had just been dependent on when Heather's parents left on their vacation to Missouri, and when she would have had a hiding spot for the little body of Heather Lee Sims. When Paula's defense lawyer called Paula to the stand toward the end of the trial, everyone in the courtroom was riveted. What would Paula Sims say? The woman who had sat silently and stone-faced for all of the investigations and all of the trial would finally be speaking. On the stand, Paula looked thin and frail and haunted. She spoke in a soft feminine voice. Paula told the story of her childhood and how she met and married Rob. She said that they had saved their money until they had enough to start a family. They had wanted one boy and one girl. Paula talked about her childhood and that she had saved several dolls to give to her own little girl. To prove the point, the defense had brought in a couple of Paula's childhood dolls and their doll clothes and doll bed. Paula had held the dolls and the clothes, showing them to the jury. Paula then explained her version of what happened the night Lorelei was kidnapped. She recounted the story with a calm delivery, never looking away from her defense lawyer and never looking at the jury. Her face was strained, but she did not shed any tears. The defense attorney then led Paula through the birth of her second daughter, Heather Lee, and how happy she and Rob were when she was born. Then she recounted the story of what happened the night her second daughter disappeared. Paula denied ever going to her parents' house at all on Sunday morning, disputing the testimony of Rob's sister. She also denied leaving the house on the day that Heather's body was dumped in the trash barrel. She stated that she was home with Rob that day and that neither of them had left. Rob and Paula's alibis for that day were each other. When asked, Paula also denied experiencing any postpartum depression after the birth of either Lorelei or Heather. Paula then left the stand. Prosecutor Don Weber's closing statement was dramatic. He scoffed at the baby dolls that had been brought in by the defense attorney, saying, quote, "It's unfortunate that Paula didn't take as good care of her baby as she did these dolls. At least this doll got a shoebox and not a trash bag. It's unfortunate that the people who weep in this case for baby Heather are the people of the state of Illinois. I was wondering when I heard one piece of evidence, when Paula Sims was smothering that baby, and its chest was burning, and it was flailing its hands and kicking its legs for 2 minutes before it went unconscious, I wondered if Paula Sims counted every precious little finger and every precious little toe when she was doing that to her. She did not." And Weber continued, "I don't want you to convict Paula Sims on passion or prejudice. That's not right. And I don't want you to convict her because the people in my county are outraged at what she did. I want you to convict her because there is no reasonable doubt about her guilt, because what she did in her murderous, malignant heart is beyond statement." Then the prosecutor looked down at the baby doll, which she had placed in Heather's bassinet in front of the jury box, along with a trash barrel. "And I want you to convict her, because a baby belongs in a bassinet." He leaned over, tenderly picking up the doll, and then quickly turning to drop it into the trash can, finishing his statement, "And not in a trash barrel." And then Don Weber kicked the trash barrel in disgust, concluding, quote, "And you should convict her, and it is your solemn duty to convict her, because she doesn't know the difference." End quote. The jury took just one night to deliberate, and when Paula Sims was brought back into the courtroom for her verdict, she was found guilty of first-degree murder. After the verdict, Paula's defense lawyer offered the prosecutor an opportunity to have a conversation with Paula. Finally, when faced with the possibility of a death sentence and desperate to avoid it, Paula Sims now wanted to talk. The prosecutor, Don Weber, would never divulge what was said behind closed doors, but in the years that followed, it was clear that Paula had ultimately confessed to killing both of her daughters, and it was an admission that she never took back. In his closing statements during the penalty phase, when Don Weber addressed the jury, he asked for the death sentence, but his request lacked passion. What would be the point, he wondered. Paula Sims had already become a shell of a human. Paula Sims received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and the sentence was delivered, ironically, on the birthday of her only surviving child, Randy. Though investigators never thought that Rob Sims was totally innocent of wrongdoing in the case of either Lorelei or Heather, no charges would be filed against him, despite the rumors that they would. Rob was also granted permanent custody of Randy as well. Within 5 months after sentencing, Rob visited Paula in prison to request a divorce. He also removed her name from the headstone over the graves of their 2 infant daughters. 25 years later, in 2015, Paula's son Randy was 27 years old. Rob was remarried, and he and his son Randy had remained close over the years. Randy was a teacher and an active member of a Presbyterian church in Madison County, Illinois. They had never moved out of the area. Randy had grown to be a handsome and nice young man. He had stopped visiting Paula in prison once he was out of childhood. He opposed her clemency in 2006, saying that she had still not accepted responsibility in the murders, and that she was a danger to him and his father. On June 22, 2015, Rob and Randy were on a church mission trip in Mississippi when their car was involved in a crash, sending them over the railing of a bridge and down to the street below. Both were killed instantly. Like the uncle for whom he had been named, Randy would tragically die young. Unlike her ex-husband, son, and 2 infant daughters, Paula Sims would end up getting a new chance at life. Sometimes life with no chance of parole does not mean life with no chance of parole. While Paula admitted that she had indeed killed both of her daughters, she ultimately would blame their deaths on a postpartum psychosis that she had experienced after their births. Why she had not experienced that same psychosis after the birth of Randy was not explained. Because of that claim, Paula continued to file for both a new trial and clemency ever since her conviction in 1990. Due to her appeals, at some point the Illinois governor had commuted Paula's sentence to life with the possibility of parole. The last step for Paula was to be granted that parole, and her attorney, Jed Stone, was determined to get it. To the parole board, he argued that recent changes in Illinois state government had made it so that postpartum psychosis and depression could be considered mitigating factors in sentencing. In opposition, the current Madison County state attorney sent a 5-page letter to the parole board stating that Paula had lied about her crimes for years and only confessed for selfish reasons to avoid the death penalty. However, the Illinois Prisoner Review Board granted Paula Sims, now aged 62, parole on October 28, 2021. The vote was 12-1. Her good behavior in prison was also a factor in the decision. Paula had served 32 years in prison and was released the next day on October 29th. Paula Sims was picked up at the Logan Correctional Center in Springfield, Illinois by several friends. She did not wish to speak to the media. One of her friends made a statement to a TV news reporter on the scene, relaying that Paula was, quote, very grateful for the parole board decision and that, quote, God is good. The TV reporter stated that Paula plans to live in Decatur, Illinois with friends and she already has a job. Paula, the reporter stated, eventually hopes to move to Alabama and open a dog grooming business. I just don't have words. Thank you for your time in watching this video. I know your time is valuable, and I'm glad that you chose to spend it listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, I would appreciate if you leave a like, and if you would like to hear more true crime stories, please consider subscribing. It was my honor to tell you the story of these two innocent victims of this admitted killer. May their memory be a blessing to all who loved them and those who fought to gain justice for them. Please, until next time, take care.